Hello everyone, welcome to the first episode of this series named Upper Edge. So, starting with this series with the subject named SCM and PE, a subject which I, at one point of time in my study leaves, perceived as one of the most difficult in the CA final. Well, whether or not the perception changed or whether it proved out to be true is something that we shall figure out in this video. So yes, before I start, let me state that I secured 66 marks in the subject of SCMPE in the CA Final July 21 exams. And what is noteworthy is the fact that our paper was a little tricky. Not difficult, but tricky. And I'll also give you reasoning as to why was it actually tricky. So I'm going to actually run you through my journey right from the lectures to the last reading. Not the last 1.5 day reading, because I'll be making a separate video on that. But from the lectures to the last reading in terms of the revision. So let's just start away without further ado. So talking about lectures, I started my lectures somewhere around February, March 2020. That is a year and 2-3 months before my attempt. But if you ask me an ideal time to start the SCMP lectures, I personally believe that in the first year of your articleship, you should be done with 3 subjects, that is SFM, FR and SCMP in that sequence. So ideally, a subject like SCMP should not take you more than 3 months to complete the lectures, considering an ideal time to watch the lectures. So the lectures that I watched were of a duration of 180 hours. It took me somewhere around 2 months. Obviously, in the last year, the time accelerates to complete those lectures. But ideally, in the first year, you can go ahead and complete these 3 subjects: SFM, FR, and SCMP. Going ahead and talking about my first reading, that is within the CA final study leaves. Now, within the study leaves, the SCMP was the first subject that I had picked up. Now, it took me about 11 days to complete this subject at that point of time. But what is noteworthy is at that point of time, the case study digest, as you might call it, was not released by the institute. It was released only on 1st March 2020, with our exam starting from 21st May originally. So at that point of time, there was no case study digest. But then what is also noteworthy is I tried and covered a few sums from the old course PM in my first reading. So that is how it took me 11 days. For you guys, I can say it can take anywhere between 9 to 12 days depending on your speed and your level of comfort with the subject. You can consider 10 to be an ideal number. So what happened with me in the first reading is something that probably I did not follow in the coming readings. In fact, which is why this series, this series named Upper Edge. So basically, in the first reading, I tried and put more emphasis on solving sums number 1. And I tried and cover every theory from the module, but then I just read it. So I read the entire module, probably like a newspaper or a storybook, like you might call it, and I just tried to get an understanding of each concept. Now the point is, later did I realize, obviously, when the institute really released the case study digest, that was actually a nightmare for all of us students of July 21, because it was only on 1st March 2020. And at the same time, our attempt being just a little more than 2 months away, with a book of like 200 pages, around 34 case studies, if I'm not wrong with the number, and or 26 case studies and 24 skill-based questions, if I'm not really wrong with the numbers. So it was about 50 questions, 200-page book that was supposed to be done altogether afresh, everything new. I'll come back to that later. But then, so let me tell you as to how should an ideal first read be. Something that I figured in my second reading, the mistakes that I actually made in my first reading. So in fact, to cover up those mistakes in my second reading also, and also to cover the case study digest, my second reading actually had become my first reading when it came to SCMP as a subject. So I'd say there are 3 things actually. So when it comes to theory, I feel a lot of theory actually gets covered in the case studies, whether it is the case studies that are given in the module 3 or that are given in the case study digest. So a lot of theory actually gets covered in the case study digest or the case studies. Some of which is actually not covered in the module as well. I mean, within the chapters, that theory is not covered, while the same theory is actually covered in the case study. So an approach that I had figured later on was that I should, what I used to do is, and I would suggest you guys the same thing, I used to go through the case studies first. So whatever theory was covered in those case studies, I used to do it only from that particular source, whether it is module 3 or whether it is the case study digest. Then I used to refer the theory given in the modules. Now, whatever theory was given in the modules, a lot of that was actually an overlapping of what is already given in the case study digest or the case studies given in the module. So I used to read only that theory which was not covered in the case studies. So let us say, for the sake of simplicity, 50% of the theory was already covered in the case studies that I read before. So now I was left with covering just 50% of the theory from the module. So the task was halfway done, because the case studies are any which way something that you would have to do even after reading the module theory. So number one, start with the case studies and cover the theory over there. I'm not saying from the very first reading you start and probably learn the case studies. In fact, learning the case studies is something that is never possible. Yes, they are learning a few theory questions which probably could be asked. Let us say the advantages of a particular thing. But then in general, learning case studies is something that is not supposed to be done, and I'm stating that very, very clearly. But you can start with reading the case studies altogether for once. And there's obviously a bifurcation for the chapter-wise case studies that is available. On any Telegram group or shared by most of the faculties, so you'll be getting it very easily. So let me take an example of, say for example, chapter 3. So what I did was chapter 3 ki pehle case study kar li. All the case studies that are either given in the third module or are given in the case study digest. Once I covered those case studies, then I used to jump to the theory given in the module. And I used to cover only that theory which was not overlapping with the case studies either in the module or in the case study digest. So which was very less as compared to the total theory given in the module. Now, I would suggest that whatever residual theory is there in the module which is not covered in the case studies, I would suggest you people to make a summary if at all you do have time. So in the first reading, if possible, which is possible, actually I did make my summary notes for a couple of chapters of SCMPe. Actually, it was just chapter 1 and 2. But then I do suggest that for theory, you guys could do that very well, because once you in fact go ahead and make that summary of that to just the residual theory of SCMPe will actually become, I won't say easy, but it will certainly become manageable to a larger extent. So summary is something that I will actually suggest you for the residual theory of the module. So first is case studies, second is the residual theory from the module. Third comes the questions from the module illustrations or the test your knowledge or the skill-based questions given in the case study digest, or obviously questions given in the RTP of either July 21 attempt or this particular attempt or your relevant attempt as the case may be. Now, I did realize this at a later point of time that in fact the pattern in the new course had changed a lot as compared to the old course. So solving old course PM questions, I'm not saying is not relevant. It certainly is relevant, because in our exams, as a matter of fact, there were a couple of questions that were picked from the old course PM. But generally speaking, the trend has changed a little in the new course, and now in the new course, there are a lot of questions already given in the module, either in terms of the illustrations or the test your knowledge, or in the RTPs, or as skill-based questions in the case study digest. So what is very important is to actually give a lot of weightage to these sums, because if you see, out of 100-mark paper that you get, it is only 20 marks of case study, or maybe 20 marks more. So maybe I could say out of 120 marks that you get, 80 marks is short going to be questions. Now, I am not saying these 80 marks are going to be practical questions, but these 80 marks are going to be questions similar to those given in the test your knowledge or the illustrations. So if you actually go ahead and see the test your knowledge or the illustrations, you will find that out of 4 sub questions, there is at least 1 sub question which has a theory component in it. So there are similar questions that are actually being asked in those 80 marks of exam, which me and my friends realized at a later point of time. Not that we did not know, but then we realized at a later point of time that instead of putting our full focus on probably the theory that we were doing or the case studies, instead we should put more weightage or more focus on such kinds of questions, because at the end of the day, they are something that are going to fetch you marks. So I suggest that out of whatever focus you put, a large part of it should be based on the sums that are there, or I won't really say sums, I would say the questions that are given in the test your knowledge or skill based questions or illustrations. Now, one thing again very important that I had realized in context of this, in fact realized post my exams. So, like I said, there's a theory sub question in the test your knowledge questions. So, what you could do is you could make a separate note for chapter wise theories that are given in the test your knowledge. So, let us say this the test your knowledge has 10 questions, and each of the 10 questions has a theory component. Assuming, so you have 10 theory sub questions. You can note those 10 theory sub questions down with the question in a separate notebook. Now, the reason I'm saying so is in our paper, while the sums were actually new, so I won't say they were new, but then they're not directly from the module. But the theory questions, if you actually see the July 21 exam, were in fact picked from those sub questions of the test your knowledge. But what happened with me, as a matter of fact, was I had mixed up a few things, and I was not able to exactly recollect the answers of those questions. So not that I did not end up writing things, but then say if it was a 4-marker question, even if it was a direct question from the test your knowledge of module, maybe I was able to score a 2 or a 3 marks out of 4. While if probably I had made a separate note of those theory sub questions, then probably I would have been able to recollect the question being directly from the module, and I would have been able to fetch a perfect 4. So that is something that I would like to suggest, that out of all the questions that are either given in the test your knowledge or illustrations or the skill based questions of Case Study Digest, it is very suggestible to make a separate note of all the theory questions with the questions as well. I mean, the answers with the questions written as well, so that you can recollect in the exam that this is a question directly from the module. Now, so that was pretty much that you guys need to do in the first reading. So this was just about the approach, talking about chapters precisely. I on a personal end felt that chapter 8 is something that is very, very important. Chapter 4 and 9 are the ones that follow the queue. But then SCMPe is actually a paper where the trend keeps changing. So there is no, I mean, you really cannot say that this is one chapter from which you can be asked a guaranteed question. But then from the past trend for our attempt, I had felt that chapter 3, chapter 8, 4 and 9, these are the 4 chapters which are actually important from July 21 point of view, and it could be different for different attempts. But I can tell you, I mean, there's a common question around, even I had the same question when I used to study for my attempt, that as to whether or not to actually cover the old course questions. So I did find an answer to this question post my exam. So there were actually a few questions being asked in just July 21 exams which are from the old PM. So now one will have to understand that it is not humanly possible to cover all the material from the new course, including the module, the case study digest, the RTPs, the MTPs, and at the same time to also cover the old PM questions. Honestly, it is not possible humanly, and all of us need to understand that fact. So at my end, I would say old course PM would be something that you could do as an additional source if at all you feel you have time. But that too, I feel you could do it for the more so practical oriented chapters, that is the target costing and the transfer pricing chapters. So if at all you feel like you have time and you want to do an additional source just to probably safeguard yourself for a paper like July 21 where you have unexpected questions, maybe you can do the old PM for chapters like target costing and transfer pricing. So that is something you can go ahead and do. This is a suggestion at my end. Obviously, I mean, what time you have in your hand would be a biggest determinant. So yes, first read, this will be the approach that I will suggest you guys, around 10 to 11 days depending on obviously your speed and your comfort with the subject. The second reading, I would say it should take anywhere between 5 to 6 days. Now, by this time, you would have done your markings, you would have made your summary notes, I assume. You would have probably solved every sum at least once. So now you are aware with most of the sums as well. So it shouldn't take you as much time. And obviously, the time you took in the first reading should reduce to half or lesser. Now, there are two broad approaches of doing this second reading. Either, obviously, in the first reading, you will be doing the case studies alongside the chapter. In the second reading, there could be two approaches of actually reading. Either you could again continue the same thing, that is do all the case studies alongside the chapters, or alternatively something that I did because that was something that suited me. I mean, I felt a little better doing this. So what I did was, maybe if I took 6 days, the first 5 days were totally dedicated to the module and the practical sums with each chapter, and I kept the last one full day as the day dedicated to the case studies. So that's what pretty much I had done. Now the problem with this approach is, obviously the first 5 days you'll enjoy like anything, because it's you just that you're doing the module theory, that is the residual theory I spoke to you about earlier, and the sums from the module and the skill based questions. But then on the last day it will become very saturating, because there will be so many case studies that you will be having to do at once. But then at the same time, I was someone that if I would do case studies alongside each chapter, that would already make it very saturating. That would make every chapter saturating, every day saturating, every hour saturating. So I decided to not spoil those 5 days for me, to dedicatedly read in those 5 days. Like I said, there's a lot much weightage to be put to those test your knowledge questions. So to not compromise on the quality so far as those questions are concerned. And once I'm done with those 5 days, the content I'm done with thoroughly, then I can spend the sixth day on the case study. So yes, sixth day obviously was not just a little, in fact, very exhausting, because I was just ending up doing those long case studies the entire day. But then I had the comfort at the back of my mind that at least those 5 days I have covered the module and the questions in a good manner. So this is again a call that you will have to take basis, or maybe you can take a middle way out and dedicate 2 hours each day on case studies, and the rest of the day you can dedicate to the module. But this is something that I'll leave upon you. But nevertheless, the second reading could take anywhere around 5 days. The third reading could take, that depends a lot much on the time that you have got, the time that you are willing to dedicate to this subject, and a lot many things. But I would say anywhere between maybe 2 to 3 days is something that should suffice. Again, going by the same logic, half the time you took in the second reading is something that you could take in the third reading. The methodology of reading would remain the same as in the second reading, just the fact that probably you'll audit a little more sums as compared to what you did in the second reading. And in fact, talking about auditing, let me in fact make this suggestion to you. At least so far as the first reading is concerned, please try not to audit sums, because when it is about SCMP sums, generally speaking, they are longer. And there's a huge chance of you committing a lot of mistakes, which you would figure only if you write down the sums. This is something that we all had, me and my friends had realized when we were actually preparing. So at least in the first reading, I will strongly recommend you to write each sum and practice it that way. Maybe in the second read, you could practice just the A category ones, or the sums that have a chance for you to commit mistakes. In the third reading, I'm not saying you audit 100%, but then obviously the component of audit would increase like anything. The approach, like I said, in the third reading would again be much more similar to that in the second reading. But what is very important again, what is noteworthy is, by the time you reach the third reading, actually हो भी जाता है, not that you have to do it specifically, but then third reading तक आते आते आपको question पढ़ते ही it clicks your mind as to what is the approach of solving the sum, or probably what was written in the case study. You recall the story that was written in the case study, you recall the broad head points that were written, and things of that sort. So by the end of third reading, what you need to make sure is, at least specifically talking about the case studies, you need to reach a level where you can read each case study. So when I say read, I'm not saying read it word by word, but you need to go through each case study in maximum 5 minutes, because that is the maximum that you will be able to afford on the day of exam. That is on the in the last 1.5 days before exam, considering the fact that there were 50 case studies. I mean, 24 from the third module and 26 from the case study digest. Obviously, there were a few case studies in the RTP and the MTP as well. In excluding those, there were 50 case studies. So there is a maximum of 5 minutes that you'll be able to give in the last 1.5 days of exam. So do make sure that by the end of third reading, you reach that 5 minutes. So there are two ways of actually, so I won't say two ways, but then there are two reasons you can actually reach that 5 minutes. So one is obviously the learning curve. So by the time of third reading, if you've read the same case study for 3 times, and obviously additionally in the lecture that you had attended, like I said, you actually tend to remember the story or the question that is actually written. So it becomes a whole lot easier. Even if it is a 4-pager case study, it is actually possible to cover it within 5 minutes. But what is very important over here, and for SCMP as a subject as a whole, is the fact that you will have to keep highlighting. So again, there are two ways. Either you make a summary for each case study, if at all you have the time, best, nothing like it. If you don't, something that I had done, I had not actually prepared summary for any case study. So what I had done is I had actually highlighted the case study. So when I say, if you see the question, it's a very long question with a lot of irrelevant data as well. So if it is a 20-line question, probably just 6 to 7 lines are something that are very important, or something that are very relevant in answering the question. So what you do is highlight those 6 to 7 lines. In the answer as well, the approach that I had adopted was having with me two highlighters, a color to highlight the head points and another color to highlight the main points within the answer. When I say the main point, the keywords or things of that sort within each head point. So I had a color code assigned, and that is how I used to highlight. So from an ideal, from an overall page of 100%, maybe my highlighting would consist of probably 30%. So when you see, you just have to read that 30% in that last 1.5 days, and that's how probably you can try and reach that 5 minutes. So highlighting is something that is very important, not just within the case studies, even within the sums as well, because there's a lot of theory explanation given in the test and knowledge questions as well. Even within the model residual theory that I spoke about, if at all you're not making a separate summary note for the residual theory at the outset. So yes, highlighting is something that is very important. So I think I'll just summarize it by quickly reiterating a few points. So SCMP, yes, at the end of the day, my understanding changed, and the understanding became that it was not actually a very tough subject. So maybe it was tough to manage, but then once you do it twice, thrice, it becomes actually manageable. It seems bulky at the outset, but then at the end of the day, it actually becomes manageable. So that is one thing that I thought I'll clarify, given the fact that I started this video by stating my perception of it being one of the toughest in the CA final course. So that is one thing. Second is, like I said, start with the case studies, followed by the residual theory in the module, followed by the test your knowledge or the skill-based questions. But the maximum weightage should be put to the test your knowledge or the skill-based questions. And again, within these questions, like I said, you can make separate notes for the theory sub-questions, and you can have it noted down separately. And apart from this, I think what plays a major role is highlighting things from end to end. I think if you do this much, I think the SCMP can become very manageable and you can ace the exams. About the old PM, like I said, if you have time, you can go through chapters transfer pricing and target costing from the old PM, the corresponding chapters from the old PM, if at all you do have time. I think that's pretty much from my end. I'll share the 1.5-day strategy in a separate video in the coming days. In the meantime, if you do have any queries for me in the context of SCMP, kindly put it in the comment box. If you like this video, do share it with your friends as well, and do press the bell icon and subscribe to this channel. That is something that will keep us motivated in posting further videos as well. And in the comment box also, you can let me know the next subject for which you want me to make the study strategy video. Thank you so much. Thanks for watching. Bye bye.